Baobab Brilliance, Perspectives on Audacity, features Black women who are the embodiment of don't speak about it, be about it. Black women who write the vision and make it plain. I'm your host, Makia Moody. Let's get into it.
Nwamaka, Agbo, I am so overjoyed that you said yes to coming on Baobab Brilliance Perspectives on Audacity. How are you today?
I am really excited to be here. The day started off with a number of frustrations, just given the state of the world. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I find that being in conversation with you, and some of the questions you prepared helped me to reflect and take a moment to pause and really ground in the work. So yeah, I'm excited for our conversation today.
Phenomenal. That makes two of us. So you said that you're excited for the conversation. One of the questions I usually ask at the start of these conversations is what word or phrase describes how you're entering into our energy exchange. Is there anything in addition to excited that you might offer?
I would say it's less a word and phrase and more like a feeling. I would say I'm entering into the conversation as like a smoldering ember. An ember that like with, depending on how somebody comes at me or something happens, it could ignite into a fire. It could cool down, and quietly ash out. I think I am like so many people in this moment feeling such a mix of, anxiety, fear, frustration, but also beauty, and joy and hope, in this political moment and trying to figure out which direction do I want to take that ember, or rather, how do I want to learn to steward that fire in a way that it goes from like a destructive burn it down force towards more of like a warming hearth, that welcomes community. And so I think, I'm trying to figure out how to contain or how to manage, my fire for good. I'm an Aries. I'm a fire sign. I'm a double Aries.
A double Aries. Okay. That's a beautiful visual, as far as the smoldering ember that can be either really forceful and overpowering and or, and maybe destructive while also like providing warmth in another context. It seems like there's like multiplicities in that statement that you just made. And it makes me wonder about the multitudes that you contain. I have watched you from afar for a few years. Your leadership at Katali Foundation is really phenomenal, especially when I think about like the current state of philanthropy and how entrenched some operating standards are that don't actually serve like the common good. But I'm wondering about like what your multitudes are, like how you became you. And you can take that in any direction because I realize that's a huge ass question. But just like whatever threads you want to weave together based on the multitudes that you contain.
How I became me. I really like that question. And I think I'm still very much in the place of becoming. But I think I would start with saying so much of my life and experience as the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, as the third of six children, as a queer Black woman, a parent, an athlete, all the things has meant that for me, I've always really tried to hone in on what's my place of belonging and great contribution to the world, i.e., what's my purpose? And in trying to find my purpose, I think I've answered those questions through different elements of my identity, right? When I think about how I want to be in relationship to people, being able to host and gather community and friends and family feels really important to me. When I think about, how I want to create change, being able to identify and call out and push back against injustices has always felt really important to me. But to also be able to vision and dream and then build for what we want for the future. So I, like so many other people, I'm many things. I'm person who currently has a paid career in philanthropy. I have the pleasure of leading the Katali Foundation as the CEO. I'm also a managing director of our Restorative Economies Fund team. I am also a person who likes to lounge in the sun and read and sip on whiskey and enjoy life. Um, but in the place of where I'm still in the process of trying to become me, I continue to be in a practice and I continue to support our organization and being in a practice of being very clear and explicit about what our values are. And then how do we actualize those values? How do we live into them? How do the values serve as something that guide us, not just in times when it's easy and can be an element of virtue signaling, but particularly in the times where things are hard and we have to make discerning choices around how we move in a particular moment. And I think as we see the dismantling of democracy, as we see rising authoritarianism, we are called to task to really grapple with what our values are and are we willing to lead with them in this moment. And so I think I'm a person who's just actively sitting with that question and that exploration around how do I continue to move from a place of deep values and a place of purpose for what I want to do in the world.
When you reference the values as an anchor and a guiding force, what are the values that are on your compass?
Yeah, to keep it 100, some of the values that have really supported me in the past have been one, discipline and rigor. And I lift up discipline and rigor not from a place of being a taskmaster, but from a place of deep consistency over a period of time. And somebody who has tried to move with, can I be who I claim to be to others, right? That requires me to walk the talk. That requires me to show up day after day, doing the necessary work of what it means to be disciplined. And in that, then have the rigor for critical questioning, curiosity, the ability to challenge myself, my ideas. So I'd say discipline and rigor. I would also say transparency, being able to be transparent, yes, with others, but also particularly with myself. Can I be honest with myself about what I am observing in the world? Can I be honest with myself about who I am, honest with myself about my mistakes and my willingness to learn and grow and evolve from them? I would say that love is a deep value, and love that comes from a place of expecting and desiring as much from myself and for myself as I would for those nearest and dearest to me. That love is an active word. It is about uh, how we show up to be in deep solidarity with others, even when times are hard. Um, yeah, I think right now those are some of the values that are holding me. I think in my workplace, some other values that are really important are ones of justice and equity, our values of redemption and forgiveness, are values of growth and evolution. And so those values, yeah, I would say they move in and out of orders of different priorities and importance based on what I'm holding at any particular moment. But then they're both personal, but then they're also professional.
Wow. Um, that's wonderful and makes me think that it would be great if so many more people had that clarity around like what the values are that underpin how they move in the world. And hearing you give that response, it makes me think like a tagline would be like your audio matches the video with how you like move through the world. There's not like a gap or a dissonance with which version of Amaka shows up at like meeting X, and then at meeting Y, you're like brand new and, like disconnected from what, the first group of people might have experienced with you. Um, So this makes me think about like shape shifting and code switching in a strange way. Just as far as thinking about like the compass that we have related to our values, but then how sometimes there's like different strategies or approaches that are needed given the context of the situation. And you mentioned discernment, or maybe I heard this, I think you did mention discernment, but like that's one of the things that came to me with how you make decisions and lead from values. And I guess I'm wondering like where there have been values tensions for you within, let's say, like the last year or two, as you think about either the work that you're doing or even like in professional spaces with the work you're doing, or even in like personal dynamics, like where your values have been in tension and or your calculation had to be different because, you know, everything is kind of everywhere all at once is what I feel like is my tagline for 2025. And the discernment is even more important because so much is shifting so quickly.
Yeah, that's a really important question, right? Understanding how to navigate our values when they come into, like you said, tension with one another. I think an example is something I recently had to navigate, and I feel okay talking about it publicly because we sent out a newsletter about it to our grantees. Was that, my values of transparency, but also, as an organization, we also deeply value safety and security, for those that we work alongside. And there is a moment as we're seeing the administration use tactics of uh, finding out names and information about organizations in order to justify state sanctioned violence against them. We found that it was really important to protect the information of our grantees so as not to make them easy targets from political forces that have hateful intentions for them. And so on our website, we have a grantee database, or we had a grantee database. We also had a page that listed our staff members and our team members and our board members. And we had that up because we do want to be transparent about who we are as a team, who we fund, which organizations we fund, and why. But again, values are also about safety and security. So I made the decision to actually take those pages down out of an effort to protect them as we see a rising authoritarian state. So I think those are the ways that I've had to learn to navigate the tension of different values that sometimes might feel odds with one another given changing political contexts.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, it's it's so much to have to figure out how to move differently in a world that wasn't designed for us to thrive anyway. But then it's like an effort that they're doing and also do it safely. So on that thread, I think one of the things that I have been sitting with is like joy, and trying to make sure that I harness it in these times. And the theologian Willie James Jennings um, said, quote, "I look at joy as an act of resistance against despair and its forces, all the forces of despair." And I've been trying to reconcile kind of like when I'm in despair about the current state of all the things, and then like where to harness joy and really like pour into joy. I'm curious about what your practices are to incite joy.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of places that I'm fortunate enough to find my joy in, and I think it is because I have a discipline and a commitment to the practice of joy. Joy is both an action, but it's also a mindset. I am a person who has enjoyed the ability to move my body as long as I'm able. So exercise is a thing that I enjoy doing in the morning. I find that being able to quite literally sweat out the stress that I anticipate of the day ahead or thoughts that might be lingering from dreams or work the previous day has helped me to, yeah, step into a new day with some joy, it has been one of the greatest gifts of joy in this moment. I think having a little one, my son just turned 10 months earlier this week, having a little one has taught me the importance of being able to practice presence, being in the present moment. It has taught me the importance of joy and, or the importance of play, and how play and imagination is such a beautiful pathway towards joy. It has taught me that, being able to enjoy the small and brief moments, being able to understand time, how time manipulates, it can feel short and long and everlasting and also gone in an instant. And so he has been the greatest gift to my life. And yes, and then being able to spend time with my partner together. I think the three of us have really enjoyed this moment of creating family, of being together, of going on walks in the evenings, of taking car rides on the weekends. And those are the things that I'm really holding on tenderly to right now.
That makes me so happy. I feel like this visceral, like warm fuzziness in what you just shared about your family unit having these experiences and taking the walks and just being present with each other. It's really beautiful, especially because I think in this moment there's so much fragmentation and like separation. So to have like that unit of people where it's like they're your people and there's like so much love overflowing. I'm glad you shared that. That makes me so happy. So this series title is called Baobab Brilliance, Perspectives on Audacity, because the baobab tree is considered the tree of life, and it's resistant to fire, and it's really crucial to the ecosystems that it sits in. And I am wondering, like, for the power of Mother Nature, are there certain lessons that you get from Mother Nature? And then I have a follow-up question. Well, so yeah, I'm making this muckety muck, but I'm not embracing perfection. So there's a question about like the baobab tree, because I think that like Black women, not that we're resistant to fire, but that there's something that's like resilient, like we're strong. There's like a lot of assets that we bring to the spaces that we occupy, and also like tender and in need of love and supports and all of those things. So one part of the question was just around like your connection to nature and if that's medicinal at all for you. And then the second part of the question is around like where audacity shows up in how you move in the world. And they're completely two different questions. So you could take one or both or be like, those aren't good questions, Makia. And then we could talk about something else.
Me, I can say a lot of words and a lot of things, so I'll figure out a way to tap on all of it. But I really appreciate the analogy about the baobab tree, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the way that, yes, the strength, the resilience, but also the tenderness and the care. And part of what has always kind of stood out to me about my own experience as a dark-skinned Black woman, has been whenever I move throughout the world, there has never been a moment or time when I show up in a place and I'm like, oh yes, this was designed and meant for me, right? So much of what we experience as Black women is navigating a world where the images we see, the stories we hear, the products that are put together don't resonate with our experiences, our body types, our stories around family and belonging. And so that has required us to learn how to access joy and freedom in our imagination and in community with one another in order to counteract a world that tells us that we don't belong and we are not deserving. So there is something about being a Black woman, and I would say being a Black queer woman, and all the other identities that sit at the intersection of who we are, that I do think in this moment, white supremacy is trying so hard to stomp out, because if a Black woman can dare to have joy, can dare to experience freedom and liberation in a world that is so clearly telling them they should not, then what would it mean for other people to recognize that and also find their own joy, freedom, and liberation in what they are seeing a Black woman dare to have an experience, right? I think that's part of what I'm holding on to right now when I think of the baobab tree. I think of, yes, that resilience, but I I think of a world who's like, oh, that tree look a little funny. That tree don't belong. And that tree's like, I'm here and I persist anyway. And not only I persist with a resilience that none of you could ever experience or have. So I appreciate the analogy. And now I'm trying to think of the other question, the other part of the question.
Was around audacity, because I do feel like, to your point of the baobab tree being like looking a little funny and maybe it doesn't belong there, I feel like in those instances we have to be more audacious. And I'm wondering, like, if you have any examples of where audacity has shown up as you are moving through this world.
Yeah, I think for me, being audacious is less about like being bold in somebody's face, and it's more about living my truth. Because I have found those times when I've tried to fit in, when I've tried to shrink, when I've tried to make myself palatable to other people, it has been at the deep detriment to myself and my well-being. It has been led to depression, and so many other hard moments that I might not just share just yet. I'm not ready to be that vulnerable with people, but to be anything less than myself would hurt my well-being. And so then the only option I have is to be myself, which in these times, I guess it is to be audacious. So those moments when I'm true to myself, those moments when I say the thing that might feel hard and scary, but that my deep intuition is telling me needs to be said in this moment, I lean into that, because that is what helps me to feel safe. That's what helps me to find a place of belonging and deservedness within myself, not necessarily within others. And doing this work with the Katali Foundation, I feel really fortunate to work with a team of people, a board, and a staff where this is a team of people who wants to live deeply into our values of redistributing wealth in order to redistribute power so that Black and Brown communities can have what they need to build self-determined livelihoods. And should I be in a workplace where the goals were anything less than that, where the goals were about prioritizing our own legacy or preserving our own assets so that we could exist into forever, that would require me to shrink in the face of who I know I want to be and what I believe the world needs in this moment. So on one hand, yes, it's about the audacity, but on the other hand, to me, it's actually about just living in my truth. And I think that's what I hold on to right now, living into my truth. To do anything less might just actually kill me.
Mm. Wow.
Sorry to be so dramatic.
No, I don't think it's,
Yeah.
well, I don't think it's dramatic. And it makes me think of how much sacrifice happens for Black women and like women of color, but like for Black women in trying to like navigate spaces that weren't built for us and are not actually conducive to us thriving. So I don't think it's like hyperbolic to say that it could kill you, especially with like the research on weathering and just how many more health impacts hit different for us. But something you said about the Katali Foundation not wanting to live on into perpetuity makes me kind of wonder about, I feel like a lot of foundations are not in that space where they're thinking, let's move the money, make things happen, get it done, and like go on with life. So I guess I'm wondering about the rationale for being a spend down foundation, because it does sound like you just made the connection to that being aligned with your values as far as like not wanting to like sit on all this capital forever and not actually distribute it to the people who are in need and able to build with it. So curious about just kind of like how that came to be and why you think there might be such a resistance in philanthropy writ large to say like perpetuity, that ain't it.
Mm. Yeah, this piece around philanthropy and Katali's decision to spend out, I think I'll start off with just reminding folks that the meaning of the word philanthropy is the love of humanity. And so when we, as I kind of talk us through why Katali is a spend out foundation, why we use the term spend out versus spend down, I think I want to start from the center. And at our center is this piece of love for humanity. Our center is a recognition that we live in an extractive capitalist system that's been built on the backs of Black and Brown communities. It's with the recognition that we need to redistribute power so that more communities can have access, control, and agency over their lives and well-being. And that in order to do that, we need to redistribute the resources around the globe. And particularly, our foundation is committed to redistributing our resources so that Black, Indigenous, and all communities of color can have the political, the economic, and cultural power to build self-determined lives and livelihoods for themselves and their families. So that's at the center of what we do as a foundation. And so I have found that if we center that goal, that commitment, that value to move money to Black and Brown communities, then all the decisions that we make around our operations, how we manage our assets, who we move money to as a foundation should flow from that place, as opposed to what most foundations do is they put themselves as the institution at the center, and then they have everything else revolve around protecting and upholding their ongoing existence as a foundation. And part of what I imagine might be happening there are a number of things, right? Since the institution of the sector of philanthropy was created, starting I think in 1917 is when Carnegie lobbied to pass the first bill that created the first foundation. But since the start of foundations, what they have been told is that, we will do the charitable giving that actually should exist in the public sector, because as wealthy people, we have created our wealth because we are smarter than everybody else. And so therefore we should hold on to the power to continue to make decisions about where money goes, as opposed to the public sector, the government, that we had represented and elected to do that. And so for us, we see our work as to redistribute, yes, the resources, but then to also redistribute the power. And when foundations see that their power and their resources are tied to their own sense of worthiness and belonging, then they would want to focus on their legacy. They would want to exist into perpetuity because it continues to center themselves and it continues to justify their own relevancy as an institution. That's not what we're trying to do here at Katali. So the reason that we were founded as a spend out, and we call ourselves spend out because we are not trying to create a vacuum. We are not trying to push people off of a cliff once we move our last grant at the end of 2028. We are trying to spend out our resources in a way that it allows wealth to circulate and regenerate out into community. So when we move our grants to our environmental justice resourcing collective, through our mindfulness and healing justice team, through our restorative economics fund, it is to move those assets out of the foundation and into the hands of the community so that they can actually enact self-determination and agency over those resources for how they want to live. And so that is why we call ourselves a spend out versus a spend down. And being a spend out is what allows us to move resources at the frequency, at the scale, and at the consistency that we know is needed to meet the scale of the hurt and harm that these communities are experiencing. So if we wanted to exist for forever, right, we might move a grant, $20,000 every year to an organization for 5 years, because in a way that kind of keeps them financially dependent on us, as opposed to like what they need right now is $200,000. What they need is $200,000 to buy the building, to build the project, to do what they need to do to get free. And so for us, we want to be able to show up and give them that money upfront right away so that they don't have to continue to focus on centering us and building a relationship with us as a foundation, and focus on fundraising from year to year, but that they can get the money and then go back to work, and go back to work again to be able to respond to the scale of the problems they're trying to address. So being a spend out just gives us the flexibility to move money in the ways that we know are needed and the ways that communities have called us on to do, as opposed to trying to only move the 5% of charitable giving so that we can maintain the 95% so that we can continue to be around for forever. It's a weird conundrum that we have in philanthropy, where you only give a little bit, you invest the rest so that you can continue to give a little bit for forever, versus giving all of it right away in the hopes that you're able to address or support communities in addressing the problems that they're experiencing. And at the very least, give them a moment to breathe, even if the problems persist, but they'll have that moment to breathe and build.
That is amazing. The conundrum makes me think of perhaps another contradiction maybe in philanthropy. And I'm curious about how and whether you navigate the inherent contradiction of using like wealth accumulated through extractive systems to fund the restorative economics. Or does that make sense, like how they're tied together? And maybe it's not. I also welcome kind of a pushback on like, well, it's not actually an inherent contradiction or how you think about it, but just like using the capital to then fund restorative economics when it's like coming, I don't know. I guess part of what I'm thinking is like, all money's not bad money, but maybe it is. Like, so wondering how you then make the magic happen that Katali is, because you're definitely transforming the communities that you're partnering with.
Yeah, I think I hear your question, Makia, and I think the question makes sense, right? It's like all wealth, particularly concentrated wealth, was extracted from somewhere, right? So then how do we then as an institution with our values justify the grant making and the work that we're doing given that extraction? So that's how I'm hearing your question. And I think that's the right question to ask all private family foundations. And part of what we recognize is there are places where we can directly put resources back into communities that have been harmed or that have experienced extraction. And part of what we're trying to do at the Katali Foundation, and part of the reason we center Black, Brown, Indigenous, and all communities of color in our giving, is that we recognize that we have to reinvest in those communities that have been extracted from, and do that restoration just to get them back to baseline so that they may then be able to enact, create, implement alternative projects that are focused on community wealth building, or projects focused on climate justice and environmental justice work, or mindfulness and healing justice work. So our work is about doing that restoration doing that restoration that can address the extraction that happened baseline, so that communities can then build up and onward from there. And I think it requires us to be honest that it's not perfect, that it's messy, that we won't always get it right, but our commitment is to try. Our commitment is to be in deep enough conversation with our grantees where they will trust us enough to give us hard feedback, where they will trust us enough to invite us into moments where they might be experiencing challenges in their projects, to help them problem solve and think things through. And I think the restoration is, yes, around the capital and its effort to close the wealth extraction, but the restoration is also in rekindling relationships. It is also in building deep enough relationships that can straddle across power differentials and actually redistribute some of those powers so that we can find a greater sense of belonging and community in one another, even through our roles as grantees and as funders.
I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours with so many of the things. Like, I have all these little ping pongs in my head that are like, ooh, you could ask about that. But my next to last question, you earlier said that you are becoming. You talked about still being like in progress, in process, becoming. And I'm wondering, given your, like, with the benefit of being able to look back on, you know, the last number of years of your life, and your previous work as a consultant, and now someone who's like a career in philanthropy, Is there a belief about social change that you held earlier in your career when you were doing the work that you've now abandoned? And like what shifted your thinking if you've had one of those departures on your journey to becoming?
Mm. I don't know that there's an earlier belief that I've completely abandoned, but I do think that there's some earlier beliefs that I've been able to add more context to, evolve, and hold in a bit more nuanced place. So, in addition to some of my early work around community organizing and electoral organizing, there's two things that I would lift up, right? There's one piece where through electoral organizing, I've always believed in identifying progressive leaders and helping elect them into office in the hopes that their representative leadership can actually create change that supports Black and Brown communities. I still think that that is important, particularly on the local and state level. I think it is a bit more challenging on the federal level as we're seeing. And part of where my thinking has evolved is that there was a moment in my life where like electoral campaigning was all I did, right? I loved the campaigns. I loved the early mornings, the late nights, the high stress, the door knocking, the engaging candidates. And what I've learned to become true is that voter engagement, voting is just one element of civic engagement, and that civic engagement is just one element of broader strategies, and that we should have all within our toolbox as part of our toolbox for liberation, right? So I think, yes, we need to vote, but I also think we need to build. I think democracy is good, but I also think deep democracy where we learn to engage in governance where we're not just focused in on the structure of government, but we're focused on the process of governing and engaging and talking and learning and evolving together is extremely important. So I would say that I no longer hold electoral politics as the holy grail. I hold it as one of the many cups that I think we should all be drinking from right now. I would also say that I have had to really challenge the ways that I've thought about it's about jobs. And I thought about who gets to decide. I think some of my early paid organizing work was when I worked on the Green Collar Jobs campaign at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. And in that work, we were training people to get a green job in the growing renewable energy green economy to fight poverty and pollution at the same time. And I think one of our missteps is that we weren't actually developing, training people, helping people to imagine what it would mean to be the owners of their own productive capacity, right? The owners of their means of production. And so now in my work, I think self-determination and sovereignty is so core to how I look at community ownership, community wealth building, and community governance. And so I think that's another way that some of my thinking has evolved in those areas. So, and I imagine it'll continue to shift and grow as I learn more and experience more and doing this work.
I wish everyone had that orientation to continuing to grow and evolve and have their mind changed or realize that they need to hold the nuance and the complexities of things. Well, Amaka, this has been so good for my soul. It's been awesome to have one-on-one time with you and just hear more about your life and the work that you're doing and also the non-work that you're doing. And so my last question for you is, what is a word or phrase that describes how you are exiting our energy exchange?
A word or phrase, I'd say baobab tree. I would say that the ability to ground deep into the earth and to stand tall and confident and strong in my purpose in being is how I'm leaving the conversation. And just thank you for seeing me. Thank you for inviting me to chat. And it was so good to just be in conversation with you today. Thank you.